Hi friend, welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute since we've talked about my Pan That palette, so let's go ahead and do the latest update and also talk about what I'm doing for 2026 while we're here. Let's go back in time and show you what my palette looked like at the last update. And now let's take a look at my palettes today. Here is what my ColourPop That's Taupe palette looks like. And here is what my Shadow Kiss palette looks like. All right, let's dive in and talk about the changes, shall we? So it has admittedly been longer than a month. It's been about 6 weeks since the last update that you saw. So when we last were talking, I didn't really think I would have any more shadows used up, but because it's been a little bit longer than a month, I was able to pull it off. So we'll first start with That's Taupe. I am really pleased to tell you that I finished off Pebble Beach, probably wasn't surprising, and then I also finished off Boa. Really and truly, once I lost Pebble Beach, I just forced myself to use Boa as a crease shade. Was it the best favorite crease shade of my life? No, but it did the job and I really wanted to finish it. As we stand right now, I'm gonna go ahead and call this palette finished because this Rock Steady shade is really a very specific type of cool taupe shade that I just don't have a ton of other lid shades to pair it with, and I don't want to be pulling out this entire palette for one shade. Yes, I know I could pop it out, but then I'm gonna all of a sudden have still a palette with some signals in it that I'm pulling out, and I don't want to do that. I have gotten great use out of this palette. To know that I have used up 5 shades fully, most of which were matte, and have pretty significant pan on a 6th shade, that means that I've used up the majority of this palette, and I am jazzed with that. I have loved the heck out of this palette. And if I was somebody who didn't have such a massive eyeshadow palette collection and wasn't someone who liked the satisfaction of doing different projects, I might even rebuy this palette, but it's been a pleasure. I'm really happy to have it. And if I'm still missing it when all is said and done, I might repurchase it because it is still available. What's really interesting to find is using up an entire palette, even like this, where it's a pleasure, I don't find myself craving it or wanting it again. I've never found myself yearning for a palette that I used up entirely. And I think it might be the fact that it was a satisfaction of having used it, that I'm ready to feel that satisfaction and joy with something entirely different. So thank you, That's Taupe. You've been great. We'll never see you again. All right, now we can move into the Alter Ego Shadow Kiss palette, which has surprising progress. So I decided that I just wanted to go all in on my favorites and see what I could do. And so that led me to finishing up Mist pretty easily and Eclipse. So I was really happy to do that. And then I kind of had a crisis on my hands because once that taupe got finished, and then I finished off of these, I didn't know an exact place forward to go. So I've inevitably had to pull in other palettes to give me what I need, because while shade can do the job, it's not a perfect match. I don't always love the look it pulls with that being in my crease. So I have a little bit of movement here, but not much. I was really surprised when I went back and looked at my previous footage, how much Zeal got used up. I wouldn't have said I was favoring Zeal, but it's one of those shades that I just seem to be able to move through pretty quickly, more quickly than Cloak. For whatever reason, Cloak seems to move pretty slow. And then Tempt moves pretty fast, considering it's probably like every 2 or 3 eyeshadows is when I come and pull this one back in. I tend to favor Cloak and Zeal, but when I'm ever kind of like getting sick of some goldy look, that's when I'm like, all right, give me Tempt. Even though Tempt is still in the rainbow, like in the wheelhouse of gold, I will go ahead and use it anyways. So this is where we're standing. Over the course basically of this year, I was able to completely pan 6 shades, which I don't know if I would have said confidently, not really using it all summer, that I would have done that. And I'm really pleased with it. I'm actually not going to put this one to rest, not going to call it quits. I'm going to keep going. What I will say though, is the same crossroads I find myself in is this is not going to take me the rest of this year. In fact, I think it might be 3 months at the most that I'm left with these 3 shades. And once I'm out of these shades, I don't feel compelled to keep shade and like keep this whole palette just for shade. As a reminder, I had gotten rid of Umbra and I had kind of decided that these other 3 shades I was not going to use, but I didn't do the full on scraping it out of here kind of thing. I didn't feel compelled to do that because they were all concentrated right up here. But once those are gone and I'm just left with shade, I like this color, but not enough to pop it out, not enough to keep the whole palette and have to keep pulling out multiple palettes every day. So I was sort of like, what will I do at that point? And then it's been dawning on me, I inevitably do get sick of the same crease shade. I like a little bit of variety. So I had naturally started pulling out 2 other palettes for different reasons. And I said to myself, well, these guys are little. Why don't I try to give it a whirl and see if mixing them in with this palette, I can start to make progress on them. And because they're pretty small, just like maybe be able to finish them up entirely over the course of this year and just have fewer things interacting with me each day when I open up my eyeshadow palettes. So let's talk about those, shall we? The first reason I found one of these was because I was looking for a like bone color that I use for like this part of my eye. I typically have been using the Maybelline single shade in linen. I'm having a hard time finding that at the drugstore. So I was like, where else do I have a shade like this? Hello, mini Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. This is where I have one of those shades in Standoff. And I will admit, when this full palette came out, I really wanted it, And I kept telling myself, don't buy it, don't buy it, don't buy it. I kept it off of my purchasing. And then for my birthday, they had come out with the mini and I was like, that feels like a nice compromise. And interestingly, I haven't really used it. So I pulled it out for Standoff. And when I did that, I was like, wow, I've got some decent other mattes in here. I have this nice Cowboy Rick shade that I could use on my lid, give me a little bit of lid variety. Am I likely to pan Bud? Probably not, but if I could get myself to use it a few times, that'd be cool. So I was like, this is a nice small palette. Even though I was pulling it out for at one point just one shade, I thought to myself, it could be nice to maybe work through this and have just one less little thing hanging around your collection. The other palette that I've been pulling out, specifically because I knew that there was a crease shade in here that would be a good replacement for the one in ColourPop's That's Taupe, was my tiny Lorac Mini Pro palette in Sparkling. This was, turns out, a highly unnecessary purchase because I had actually bought their bigger palette, and then when these were on sale, I picked up another one and I was like, there's so much overlap in here. What was I thinking? But this palette already have pan showing. I actually had talked about this as a contender for 2025 and I decided to not do it. But what I'm drawn to for this is obviously this crease shade, but then I get a bronzy-esque shade back in my life, which I have been missing, having some kind of bronze brown look for my lid besides just gold. This still kind of goldy, and I'm not gonna prioritize it until my Shadow Kiss shades are done, but like wouldn't hate having this in my life either. And I thought that if I were down to just these 2 palettes, they could also kind of play well with each other. Do I think that I will still need to bring in other shadows? Yes. When I'm down to just these two guys aren't the most standalone successful partners, but that's okay. Because if I have to bring in something that's a third, I can at least be getting through these two things. And who knows, maybe that bigger third palette that I bring in might become the contender for the 2027 Pan That palette. So in summary, that's taupe we've said goodbye to, and I'm considering her finished up in 2025. Shadow Kiss be on her last legs. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep working with her in the hopes that I can also give you updates on these two palettes, and really hoping by the end of 2026 to be done with them and have removed some palettes out of my life. Some little palettes that often get overlooked because they're so small, but take up a bit of space. So that's where I've landed. Hopefully you're excited about that. Hopefully you're thrilled to see how I progress through some different brands because I haven't featured them in a while. Curiously, I think if you look back at my history, it's been ColourPop and Lorac have dominated my Pan That palette challenges. So fascinating. So it's curious to see that I've naturally found another Lorac palette to bring in. Urban Decay I've never done before. I know Urban Decay I think was one of the original palette choices that people were going to for brands, like any of the naked palettes people were panning, but I've just never really been drawn to wanting to pan a naked palette before. So I don't know, we'll see. But thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in my next update real soon. Bye.